Hey guys, welcome to season 1, episode 1 of David Baseball Card Philosophy. I guess I should say David's Baseball Card Philosophy. So, the kind of idea behind this channel, right, is my baseball journey started when I was very young, kind of picking it up through the family. And I learned a lot about baseball history when I was little. And I ended up, when I was around 15, working in the Smithsonian, in the archives in American history, doing like artifact identification for old baseball. So as I've gotten older, I've gotten more and more into kind of private curation and archival work and writing, doing essays and things like that, particularly on early baseball cards, as well as baseball photography, just different kinds of artifacts. I'm really interested in the artifacts that were democratic. And what I mean by democratic is that they kind of mirror the American ideals that have at least been present or have lingered over the development of American society, culture, and civilization at large, which is the attempt to make collective, right, to enable individual access into a collective phenomenon. And nothing more approximates that to me than baseball. Obviously, national pastime, but even the culture around it in terms of the news media, early Type 1 photography, which was then put into newspapers and sent around the country, as well as, obviously, and most importantly, I think the baseball card as a media object, something that was printed with the early dot matrix industrial method of color lithography in the early 1900s, the T206s and the American Caramel E90-1s. Those are really powerful artifacts to me, historically. So, give me 1 second. What I want to do here with this channel is to kind of encourage like a deepening, right? Because I know a lot of us, and I'm sure the people that will come here and visit this channel and discover it, are very into baseball cards, baseball history, baseball memorabilia, and getting in touch with history. And that's a very powerful thing. And I think baseball cards can take us there, as well as photos. There were a couple of things. I know a lot of the cultural artifacts in terms of films and books. I read this one book. It was like The Babe and Me, when I was younger, about this kid who was like, he would touch the baseball cards and then he would actually get transported back in time to the time and place where the card was made and interact with the player in the book, as well as I think the movie Field of Dreams, right? I think that's another powerful kind of story of recollection. And I think what baseball history can do, I think especially print media and images, is they can transport us back to that period of time. And we can have a really genuine experience, almost like an archetypal experience with something that would have been obscured otherwise. That's what images and I think photography can do, is bring us into a point in time where we otherwise would not have been able to reference it. This was the huge kind of innovation that I think happened between the kind of Harper's Weekly woodcuts, right, which were more figures of representation. They didn't make the leap into photography or real concrete representation. That happened more into the early 1900s as opposed to the late 1800s. So I think I just want to use this first video to kind of dig into the themes that we're going to be dealing with here. My realm of expertise is pretty specifically the peak or the height of deadball. So I kind of want to place that myself. I guess I would include 1906, 1907, 1908, but it's definitely 1909. all the way up until 1916. Red Sox World Series victory with Babe Ruth through like what it was, a 14 inning victory in that World Series against the Robins. And at the end of that, right, literally right into the very end of that, World War I starts after that World Series, right? So there's a couple of different really important fractures that are notable during this period of time in history. One primarily being the Federal League, right? 1914, 1915. You get to the point where the owners are making obscene amounts of money off of baseball because it is becoming America's number one pastime and cultural phenomenon. Some of the first pop stars or pop culture celebrities that we ever had as a culture: Christy Mathewson, Ty Cobb, into Babe Ruth, right? These are figures that were larger than life. These are kind of pre-Hollywood industrial archetypes. It was that serious at one point. So owners like Charles Ebbets, he was charging like $5 a ticket for the World Series, right? They're making a lot of money. And a lot of the big players at the period of time, Tris Speaker being one of them, Russ Ford was another notable one. They did not feel like they were getting paid what they needed to, right? Again, so that's one of the big reasons why Tris Speaker left that world champion Red Sox team before 1916 and went to Cleveland. And then that is as well the reason why Russ Ford actually moved to the Federal League and became a pretty big part of that with the Buffalo team. That is one aspect of what makes that time period really important. But the second, I mean, obviously, again, World War I, right at the tail end of that period, that's what I mark off as the end of peak deadball, moving into the live ball era, right? That's the downhill. The second, which marks the beginning of it, is obviously that Ty Cobb Honus Wagner World Series, 1909, and the creation of the modern baseball card, as well as the explosion of photography and photojournalism in news media for baseball specifically. You just don't see it before 1909. And there's kind of a confluence of factors there that we'll explore. We'll kind of go deeper into the history of that as we progress through this channel. But I think primarily, and the most important thing there about media is media itself is what changes the game. Obviously, you have those kind of the Harper Weekly stuff. You have those old Judge cards, the Allen and Ginter. But this is a pre-modern representation of baseball. It's very firmly kind of black and white, with perhaps some few exceptions, color lithographs. It's very Victorian, right? Not only in terms of the way the players dressed, but in the way that the game was played. It's this strange balance. Baseball moves out of prehistory and into modernity during this period. And it's difficult to elucidate exactly how or why. But if you look at the way that print media functions, specifically the photograph, and the entrance of the photograph into the common lexicon through newsprint, you really are looking at the rising of modernity. So I've written a lot about this, so it'll be hard to kind of parse it all out, and this is going to be a progression. But baseball plays a huge part in this and is probably the foremost medium through which you really do see this industrial revolution, specifically of the image of photography, happen. I'm sure as many of you know, right, the T206 portraits of Cy Young, of many different figures in that set, right? There's no need to go too deep into it, are by Carl Horner, right? One of the big photographers of that period of time. The way that the image is translated is through an artist's rendering of that photograph, which is then rendered again through a machine to create multiple reproductions of the image through dot matrix printing, color lithography, dot matrix printing, industrially. And I wrote an essay on this about the T3 and traced this method. It wasn't necessarily a new method, but the way in which it was used to create these cards, the mass production of it through the American Lithography Company, which was tasked out by the American Tobacco Company, was a very profound representation of this kind of burst into industrial modernity. And it has a lot to do with America's industrial power, machine power, that was created during this period of time. Notably, it's the automatic cigarette roller that was created by actually an employee of a rival company, and that it ended up being purchased by the American Tobacco Company, and that allowed them to jump out ahead. So you can obviously see and hear the echoes of this historical moment that we're in now, 2025, and stuff like AI, right? Machine automation. You can see that replicated down through to 1909, 1910, 1911 with this lithographic method as well as the cigarette rolling method. So we're kind of in right now as a country, I would say like a third or even fourth industrialization, depending on what you want to call the birth of the internet. It's probably the third. And then the fourth now would be the AI, cloud industrialization. And some of the best ways to see this, you can use baseball as a way of looking back into history and looking back through time and understand how those changes happen and why. So that's going to be what this channel is about. And I hope you kind of want to join me there on that journey. We'll look at some really cool baseball cards and artifacts and images, and we'll kind of piece together history. There will be stuff I think that'll be outside of that very specific range of 1909 to 1916, but that's the sweet spot for me. Some stuff before, definitely some stuff after, and we'll kind of go through this journey. I hope you enjoyed this first video, and I'll see you soon.